Good morning and welcome to this Friday morning discussion on the Himalayas. On behalf of the Hudson Institute and the Observer Research Foundation, we are delighted that you could join us this morning. And special greetings to His Holiness for being here and for helping us kickstart this 3-year program that ORF is embarking on, basically to have more sophisticated conversations around the Himalayas, which tend to be sometimes on the periphery of most conversations, many a times romanticized in Bollywood movies and Hollywood movies, but mostly ignored when it comes to the real core issues. But as we proceed with today, I think our thoughts must go out to those who are still suffering from the aftermath of the earthquake in Nepal. And I think moments like these, in a sense, compel us and motivate us to have fresh conversations that will allow us to respond to what is certainly a region in transition in many ways. Not only are the earth plates moving, but there are political changes, there are cultural changes, there are ecological challenges. And all of them are posing before us a series of questions that we must try and find answers to. And that is why we are here. This is the first of our events, and we are delighted that this is in New York, which is in many ways the capital of a globalized world. When we speak about the Himalayas, many a times we tend to skate over the impact of this largely confined geography. There are about 2 billion people who depend on the Himalayas. There are 4 river systems. The Ganga river system, which caters and provides lifeline to roughly 650 million in the Indian subcontinent. There is Indus river system. Another 200 million depend on that system. There is the Mekong, which is a sister river system, but dependent on the same geography as well, which has close to 350 million people living off that. And then the most ignored are the Chinese river systems, many of them which feed from the Himalayas or the extended Himalayan region. Close to 2 billion people in that part of the world, 1/3 of humanity, is directly or indirectly served by the Himalayas. There are 600 languages in the Himalayas, and there are 6 language groups that exist in that particular region, and it's really diverse. But there are also some stark realities. Some of the lowest income households are in that particular region. Poppy cultivation, drug trade is something that proliferates that region, and it has fed into geopolitical and political movements. It feeds radical movements, the reverberations of which sometimes are felt far away. And that is again because opportunities and economic realities are limited for many of those. So what we wanted to do with this initiative was discuss 3 changes that are profoundly shaping that particular part of the world. The first is climate change, ecology, environment, the impact of man on that particular ecosystem. The Himalayas have served us, but have we served the Himalayas enough? And have we maintained that particular system and sustained it for the next generation? That is one conversation we want to have, and we will have some part of that discussed today. The second conversation we want to have is on the political, cultural changes that are taking place. We have the Chinese who have rediscovered religion and who certainly want Buddhism as something that needs to be taken to the world. We have an Indian Prime Minister who sees Buddhism as central to the Asian century, in his words. And certainly he believes that this region is critical to that Asian century. We also have within that particular region many other identities that are jostling for space to be heard. And this is creating a complex political, cultural situation in that particular region. And we want to discuss some of that today as well. And finally, it cannot be ignored that the Himalayas witnessed 3 nuclear countries, Pakistan, India, China, each of them with testy relationships. And certainly the geopolitical implication of that region cannot be skated over. And we will probably touch on that today as well. So this is by way of introduction. Let me thank you again for joining us. At this time, let me first invite Ambassador Husain Haqqani to just come to the top of the room, and Director Sanjay Joshi to also join him.
Good morning, and thank you, Samir, for getting us off to a good start, albeit a few minutes late. Your Holiness, it's a pleasure to host you here in New York and at this event on the future of the Himalayas. I represent the Hudson Institute and I'm the director of its South and Central Asia program, which is the region that touches the Himalayas. And we are honored to have His Holiness the Gyalwang Drukpa this evening on behalf of the Director of ORF, Mr. Sunjoy Joshi, and the President of the Hudson Institute, Mr. Kenneth Weinstein. I welcome all of you to this event, which will hopefully just be the beginning of a process of discussion about the Himalayas. Most of you who are here have an interest in that region. Somebody, as I was walking in, said that their interest was based on the beauty of the high mountains of the Himalayas. But the Himalayas are not just the highest mountain range in the world. They are also the crossroads of Eurasia. They have constituted a historic trade route. Those of you who are interested in such trivia would remember that this was the route that Marco Polo took all the way from Europe into China. It has been a crossroads of civilizations and faiths. Even today, the Himalayan region has Buddhists, it has Hindus, it has Muslims, and a small number of Christians living within that region. It also has been a region where Chinese and Indian and European and even Arab civilizations have interacted over history. It is the source, as Samir pointed out, of 4 river systems that are crucial to China, the South Asian region, and the Southeast Asian region. But now we see that it's not just the crossroads of civilization and the crossroads of Eurasia, it is also the crossroads of many issues that are crucial, that need to be addressed if the world is going to avoid ecological as well as political disasters. It has become a crossroads, of course, of competing ambitions between global powers. It is also a region where the tradition of religious tolerance is being challenged for the first time in a very, very long time. It is a region where the economic and technological aspirations of countries of the region may result in creating potential environmental degradation and an ecological crisis. These are mountains through which some nations may want to bore tunnels to reach others for transportation, but is that necessarily an ecologically sound prospect? And then, of course, the political rivalry that is manifesting in an impact on the traditional way of life, and the tolerance between various communities. We at Hudson Institute are always interested in looking at global issues from the point of view of long-term sustainability. We look at international security, we look at economic issues, but we always think long-term. Hudson Institute has had a long history of doing that. We were looking at the prospects of thermonuclear war when nobody talked about it, and what it could result in, and how one could actually live beyond it. We were examining the rise of Japan as an economic power when Japan was not deemed as such. And in that tradition, we partnered with Observer Research Foundation of India to look at the Himalayas, and we have been honored by the presence and support and patronage of His Holiness the Gyalwang Drukpa, who represents one of the oldest Buddhist orders in the Himalayan region with 27 million followers. The Gyalwang Drukpa, unlike some other religious personalities of the region, does not have a tradition of direct involvement in politics. And as we all know, as newspaper readers and television watchers, people who dabble in politics get a lot more attention than those who do not. But that does not mean that his views and his understanding of that region and his concerns are something that we can all ignore. He has experience in the region. He has now made it his cause to try and make the whole world aware of this intersection, as I see it, of political, security, climate, and culture-related issues that have significance for the entire world. We will have discussions today in this half-day conference in which we will have a session on issues of climate, issues of economics, and issues of culture. And then we will have a discussion on the hard issues of security, the power relationships between, say, for example, China and India, and then all the other countries in of the region. Everything now is interconnected. So the earthquake in Nepal affects the entire region, but so does the politics of Nepal and the rivalries that are shaping there. India-Pakistan and their rivalries and their dispute over the Kashmir region and what they may want, or either one of them may want to do to resolve it or force a resolution of that. These are issues that by and large have been ignored. They have been ignored by the world's leaders, and they have also been ignored by the international commentariat. We, through this conference, hope to make a dent in that. And hopefully this will mark the beginning of a dialogue about the Himalayas. We see that a lot more discussion takes place on interstate rivalry than on the much longer term processes that are taking place between civilizations, between regions, and between man and earth. And I think that this is an occasion to try and go beyond the normal paradigm of just understanding interstate politics, but look at things that have implications for all of us as human beings far beyond that. So it is my honor to request His Holiness, the Gyalwang Drukpa, to now address us. And you're welcome to stand or speak from here.
I don't know what's much better.
I think it's good to.
Maybe I can just stand.
It's
a little better.
Wherever you stand or sit, sir, there will be some radiance. So
Thank you very much for having me over here, and I'm very honored to sort of given the opportunity to exchange or sort of like to share my little experience. Obviously, due to my limited English, I wouldn't be able to sort of express the thing that I wanted to express. But of course, I asked my friend to write some of the key points that I wanted to express into English. So it's a sort of like a partially written lecture, I would say. Normally, I don't like to read anything in front of a crowd because it gives kind of a, how do you say, sense of just like a school, like reading a book in front of the people, and it doesn't really. And also, it's just individually, me personally speaking, I don't really feel that much of connection with the crowd and all these things. Reading a paper. But this morning, I was just requesting my friend Arjun to write us some key points because my English is not good, and also there are the crowd over here are very highly educated and also highly sort of like qualified and very much like reverend, and I can't afford to sort of waste your precious time just listening to my, just like gossip, just like a useless gossip and wasting your time. Anyway, as Sumir, my friend, he said that lots of things has been given by the Himalayas to the rest of the people in the world. But because he said it very correctly, the water, the different major rivers are flowing from Himalaya, like Indus River and the other rivers. For example, Indus River is coming down via Ladakh and goes to Pakistan, and that's way. So, of course, millions of people are surviving on that river. And also, there's so many rivers are coming from Mount Kailash and through the Himalayas. So, therefore, the Himalayas have always given to everyone a natural barrier to protect the local communities. However, no one has given to the Himalayas. From being a natural defense, a wall from enemies for all people living in the Himalayas, and to giving resources and life-giving water to 1.7 billion people, including the lineage known as Drukpa lineage, that is my own lineage, and that Drukpa Buddhist lineage, as the Samir again said very correctly, that Ladakh, for instance, it's predominantly the believer or the follower of Drukpa lineage. And but obviously, naturally, the Drukpa followers are the, how do you say, the guardians of Himalaya and guardians of entire sort of nature and also culture, and of also the peace and happiness, etc. And Drukpa, for example, the Drukpa in Himalayan language, Druk actually means the dragon. And this lineage is known as a dragon lineage. It sounds like a very superstitious, but actually it is nothing, because the founder of Drukpa lineage, when he decided to look for a place where he was thinking of starting his movement, his teachings, etc. That time he found a 9 dragon lying on that specific place, and when he walked towards to that place, the dragons, they flew up in the sky. And then he he decided to name his lineage or his his followers and his activities as a dragon activities, dragon lineage, dragon practice. And also he decided to call himself as also Drukpa. That's the kind of a way. Now, I myself also, people call me as a title, as a Drukpa. Of course, some people, they just can't pronounce very nicely, so they call it Drukpa. They call it Drukpa. So, you know, there are the little bit of difference in the pronunciation, but actually Druk is the dragon, Pa is the holder, so the dragon holder. Anyway, so that has been practiced more than 1,000 years up in Himalaya, from Ladakh to up to Nepal, throughout the Himalayas, it has been practicing, and it has been successfully sort of followed by the people, because it was very helpful. Because unlike other lineage, the Drukpa lineage or Drukpa practice or Drukpa sort of like a tradition, if you like, is very well known to be very much like a humanitarian kind of workers, humanitarian kind of oriented. So we practice ritual, we practice meditation, we practice mantra, we practice yoga, etc., etc. But mainly, this lineage is very dedicated for humanitarian and serving others, and serving nations, serving serving nature. So this is very much like a specialty, if you like, of this particular lineage. That's the reason why the Himalayan border, everywhere, the people started to sort of stick with this particular tradition, because they know and they understood that this is the important tradition to save them and to guard the protection, to protect the frontiers, etc., etc. So it is a very sort of like a very well-known sort of a religion, or whatever you may call it, even though it is not a religion, but it is like a very well-known sort of a tradition to be followed for the sake of the national security, and also for the sake of the saving nature, and also respecting the nature. So, speaking about the nature, also we Drukpa always talk about respecting the nature, respecting each other. So we always not only talk about it, but we go and interact with the people and with the nature. So this is what we have been like for hundreds of years. We have been doing that, and it's very well known for that. However, the worry is for local community that live here. This is one of the most remote place on the planet, and by that virtue, the last to get anyone's support, resources, infrastructure, investments, and also finally the jobs. Of course, once upon a time, as you all know, that old Silk Road was very much like a very much the cause of or the source of economy, and Ladakh was one of very much like an important hub, and where they did get a lot of benefit, and everything sort of like was booming, but then they sort of stopped that kind of that particular kind of Silk Road kind of movement, and therefore the situation is that now up in Himalaya, everything is kind of a poor in the sense of education, poor in the sense of jobs and infrastructures and resources, etc., etc. For example, like where there is infrastructure kind of poorness, then obviously there is not much of there is no sort of water coming in the tap, and so people have to work very hard to get water inside, and mainly, of course, who's suffering? The woman suffers, and here we are. I mean, especially me, very passionate to talk about gender equality. So in that context, I just would say that, you know, the women up in the Himalaya suffers quite a lot. We men are enjoying quite a bit also. So women are very, very, very nice. Himalayan women are very good, but women are suffering a lot because of the lack of infrastructure. And also because of the lack of the jobs, the children's, they have to go out. First of all, there is no educational center, or there is no college, there is no university. Obviously, thanks to Indian government, we have many schools, but I don't know whether we have that quality schools or not. I'm not very sure, but we have a lot of schools up in Himalaya, provided by Indian government, for example, for Indian side of the Himalaya, and obviously the Bhutan has also same thing, same kind of problem, but same kind of facilities, and Nepal also the same kind of problem and same kind of facilities. But up in the Himalaya, overall, we suffer from lack of the educational center, and then they have to go other countries to sort of study further, college, university, etc. And once you finish this thing, or finish the education, then they wouldn't like to go back home, because there is no job, there is no future. So that is the very severe kind of situation, very serious kind of situation. And so the job, like yesterday when I go to Baltimore, I felt the similar kind of thing that is happening in the Himalaya also, and similar, not as bad as that maybe, but similar, very similar. And I think if we leave it like this for just for decades, I think we will also be suffering same kind of thing. So therefore, it is something that we have to be very paying attention on that. And therefore now for example, the children's now 6,000 children, for example, studying abroad or other parts of India. So they can't just get sufficient education in Ladakh itself. So they have to go out, and obviously you can imagine that 600 children has maybe including two parents and the brother and sisters. They have to also go out finally, because they all have to sort of join together and look for a job. So that actually means the beauty of the Ladakh, beauty of Himalaya, apparently, will be sort of will be diminishing, will be sort of disappearing. and diversity and all these like different religion and all these beautiful surviving together, all the different religion, all different culture, all different sort of like a nation, all sorts of things. Right now, Ambassador said the same thing, that Hindu and the Muslim and also the Christian and Sikhism and the Buddhist people, they all live very nicely and very, very sort of like harmoniously for many, many hundreds of years. But now this beauty will also be sort of going, sort of reducing, just because of lack of the facilities of education and resources, infrastructures, investment, and jobs, finally. So that is also one thing that we have to sort of look into. And the problem as national economy grow and these regions are left out, we see migration. This is what I said already. Migration of our youth and the talent. This must be stopped. This is what we have to look into it. If not, we will lose everything, including the beauty and the diversity of local culture and the tradition. Right now, as somebody told to Ambassador that the mountains of Himalayas is very beautiful. That's for sure. It is very beautiful. But of course, again, mountain without what do you call that? Anybody who is looking after it, and anybody who is really like sort of nourishing it. I think the mountain also suffers from the global warming, etc., etc. So there's sort of like the mountain, the snow mountains are getting stripped, and now. Many of the mountains I can see when I fly, and also when I track, when I hike, I can see that many mountains are now getting black. Means you can see the rocks, and the snows are getting sort of very thinner and thinner and thinner. This is also sort of, I think, due to our lack of education, due to our lack of sort of like love towards the Himalaya and understanding of the value of the Himalaya. And let's go back talking a little bit about the Drukpa lineage. The Drukpa lineage from Ladakh to Nepal, and also the Bhutan. The Bhutan, the national religion is the Drukpa lineage. So Bhutan to the northeast of India, and Tibet. And the sees a lot of these problems. We all sees that there's a lot of these problems firsthand, and is also the first to offer relief. For example, any kind of natural disasters comes. For example, in Ladakh, a couple of years ago, there was a cloudburst, and the first people who went out and give relief help was the Drukpa community. The Drukpa community went even before Prime Minister came. Prime Minister's kind of relief work came in to the region. We, the Drukpa followers, went out and saved quite a bit of people, and a lot of things we did it. So this is one of the examples, small example, and also just incident that we had just a couple of 2 weeks ago, that the earthquake in Nepal. Also, our nuns, like Drukpa nuns, they call it Kung Fu nuns. The nuns, they refused to be evacuated, and they stayed there, and they said, our mission is to save people and to save the nation and to sort of protect anything that it needs to be protected. So we don't want to be sort of going and running away from this, how do you say, fear. Obviously, that there was of course, right now we can say, and we don't feel that much, but if you are just to simply imagine that if we are there at that time, it is just amazing, you know, like it's just unbelievable, because everything is falling down. The earthquake is really one of the most kind of dangerous and also very scary kind of thing. So these girls, or nuns rather, over 500 nuns, they refused to be. Sort of many people came and many people telephoned them, and many of my students and my friends, who has even some of them have their own private jets. They're willing to send the private jets and helicopters, and army also to organize army aeroplanes and all these things, because they were thinking that there will be a further devastate kind of earthquake comes and then cause the airport runway crack, then nothing can be done. So therefore they were saying that, you know, that we will come and evacuate it, all of you. So please be prepared. And they refused to go. They said, our mission is to save others, to protect the nation and to protect the people, whatever it is need to be done. So it is not our dictionary, you know, our dictionary doesn't say that you run away when the how do you say, natural disasters happens, or when any kind of disaster happens, you run away. That's not in our dictionary. So this is the reason why they stay back, and they were doing every day, every night, they were doing the relief work constantly. Even though they themselves, they don't have anything. They don't have anything. They don't have a shelter. They don't have kitchen to where they can cook. Of course, they have a little bit of a food. That's all. And but obviously, they are very happy. As a Drukpa follower, they were happy there to sort of say, serve anybody around. So these are the Kung Fu nuns, and obviously this is not only the nuns, but there are many monks also, and many boys and girls, lay people. Also, they were very much dedicated because as a follower of Drukpa lineage, they all know that what is the principle of this. So that is the thing. And national defense, this is also one of the issue, that the security, but that is some maybe the discussion, maybe along the discussion we'll have some other opportunity to talk about the national securities and national securities up in the Himalayan region, which has been already sort of one of the many responsibility that has been taken by the Drukpa followers. And now, obviously, one of the recent kind of incident that is happening is forced conversion of our Drukpa monasteries by external forces. And also they said that, you know, some of them said that, you know, you can't live, you can't stay in that monastery, you have to leave the place, and that sort of thing. And some of these places, of course, they use their money to sort of get rid of everything, and they just convert. So some of them, unfortunately, they use the Buddhist also to sort of convert the Buddhist monasteries into different types of Buddhist lineage or different Buddhist belief, and that sort of thing. It really should really be stopped. That is very important, and that is mainly started happening in the Mount Kailash, and then obviously it is softly it is happening in Ladakh and Sikkim and almost everywhere, everywhere. You know, so therefore, this is something that we have to really be taking care, and we have to be talking about. So, thank you very much for listening to my gossip. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Holiness. We will now have a very brief break so that we can then have our first panel, which will be moderated by Dr. Sunjoy Joshi of the ORF, and the topic of that is climate, economics and culture. A short break. Thank you.
Initial inaugural introductions. So welcome back again after your tea break. Personally, for me, it's a great honor to be chairing this panel. And thanks to His Holiness for being here with us. And of course, Ken for partnering with ORF in hosting this event in New York. For me personally, this actually is a topic close to my heart. Because in many ways, I regard myself as a child of the Himalayas. I was born there and spent the best years of my life there. And whenever I need spiritual rejuvenation, which is very often, let me assure you, I keep on going back home. I still regard that as my home. So it's a great pleasure being here with you all and chairing this panel. Let me begin with a small anecdote. I'm talking about 40 years back. I must have been about 14, 15, around that time. And my father was a postmaster, posted in one of the remote hill villages in a district called Pithoragarh. And I used to keep going with him during my vacations. And he took me on these short treks outside into the villages in the region. And I remember as a child going out with him and saw these lovely terraced farms. Some were cultivating these high altitude potatoes and all kinds of crops. And one of the most remarkable thing I noticed was that there were whole tracts of farmland which had no fences. And we walked, terrace after terrace, and the devastation caused by, in some cases, by wild boar was profuse. They had dug up virtually everything. So I asked a very logical question. I said, why there's so much wood lying around here? There's so much stone lying around here. Why aren't these guys building fences? So my dad said, why don't you ask them? So we caught hold of one farmer who we met merely coming down the way. And I asked him that why have you not fenced these farms? Why is there so much devastation caused by the wild boar and all the other animals around? And his answer was very simple. He said, Chol, eto kakadak chu, eto suarak chu. This is the share of the wild boar. This is the share of the kakar, the barking deer. How can I take it back from them? This is the land I share with these animals, and I've been cultivating this. I've been going back there year after year, and many more fences have come up. Farmlands have got divided. Each year I've gone back, seen many more fences, and those fences today are actually a metaphor for what has been happening in the Himalayas persistently for so many decades. We are in this panel, we'll be talking about various issues. The fact is that these are, in a way, the lungs of the world. These are the water towers of the region. In the introduction, we discussed, it was mentioned, how the major river systems in many countries originate in these areas. So they are the water towers. But the fact is, water, climate, knowledge, even trade, and disasters know no boundaries. The boundaries which we have superimposed upon them are artificial constructs. These are political constructs, and always, religion, folklore, music, the trade impulses, and the ecology have been the great unifying, the great integrative factors which have been bringing the people together for generations and generations in this area. 70s, if you remember, the first major ecological movement, perhaps, of recent times began in the Himalayas. It was called the Chipko movement, the movement of tree huggers. When women went out into the forests, hugged the trees, and said, I am married to this tree. No one can cut it. Because this is the forest on which my livestock depends. This is the forest on which my children depend. I will not give it up under any circumstances. So that was the birth of the Chipko movement, which completely altered the contracting systems by which natural produce was being exploited in those areas. So these are some of the community movements which began in that area. So there's a huge history, there's a huge culture, there's a huge ecology, which has been the driving force behind much of this. But we have so many experts here with us today. I will keep on butting in with some comments on and off as the chair. I will take that privilege. But let me, first of all, when His Holiness spoke, he spoke of the very key problem, the problem of economy sustainability, the huge migration one sees in these areas, people moving out, talent moving out. There is very little to hold them back. Issues of unemployment, migration, how do you, it's a contradiction in terms, because in a way, every impulse that we know as modern development, what we've understood as development, actually becomes a very disruptive force in breaking on very close integrated communities. Now, how do you build upon, how do you build infrastructure, which in many ways, when you try to build roads, when you try to build large projects, when you try to create employment in that region, you end up causing many other larger implications which are more disruptive than they are creative. So the whole challenge of having an economic life, having economic sustainability in those areas becomes a key question. So let me first of all invite Ken Weinstein, the president of the Hudson Institute, to open this discussion. Ken, you have about 5 to 7 minutes, right, and I'll keep the time, and then we will pass on to the others. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Sunjoy. I'm also truly honored to be in the presence of His Holiness. As I met when we just spent a few moments together, it's you're a leader of deep insight with followers throughout the world, and also someone who speaks with immense moral clarity on the fundamental challenges that are faced to the practice of your religion in freedom, in peace, and in openness at a time when others are much less favorable to it. And your courage, your insight, as I say, I'm truly honored to be on this panel with you. And I'm also honored to be on this panel with those who are not holinesses as well. I should note, and I'm not a child of the Himalayas. I was born 38 blocks south of here at Beth Israel Hospital. So but I appreciate the region, and it was in India earlier this summer. Let me, to talk about the economics of the region, let me just say, first of all, the economics of the region, and I'm going to be talking about the large-scale economics, not the human economics, although the two are obviously interrelated in some deep way. the region itself is deeply underappreciated by us in the United States. So it's especially important that we're partnering with our good friends at the Observer Research Foundation, with whom we've had a partnership for some time, to look at these issues. Because in the United States, we tend only really to focus on the region at times of crisis. Obviously, the horrific earthquake, challenges in Tibet and the like. So when you look at the region, it's an absolutely it's just an absolutely fascinating region. Topographically, with the Himalayas, ancient cultures, significant poverty, though development. You've got 10 of Asia's largest rivers, which either, as was noted before, either start in the Himalayas or in the Tibetan Plain. And so it's a region where people's lives are really across borders interrelated in a profoundly deep fashion, more so than we're used to in the United States when you look at this. And so these 10 largest rivers serve as the source of water for 47% of the world's population. So it's really a dramatically important region, just naturally, aside from the cultures and the rich heritage and the like. Now, the region economically is the primary. There are a number of challenges. One of which was addressed earlier, is this issue of China's being in a very fortunate situation. Someone who is of Jewish heritage, there was a long-running joke among Jews about the state of Israel that Moses spent 40 years wandering in the desert to find the only place in the Middle East where there wasn't oil. And one sort of looks at the way that the Lord works, that the forces more broadly work mysteriously, where China has significant upstream control of water resources, natural resources in 9 of the 10 largest rivers really are somehow under China's upstream control. And so this poses a major challenge given often a lack of transparency from China, a lack of willingness to share basic information, in addition to obviously a major quest to move development forward as China modernizes very quickly, as a significant portion of China is moving into cities. All of this means that that there are very complex economic forces at play that have also geostrategic implications that one has to deal with, and all the regions of the country, because of the significance of the agrarian economies and subsistence farming in most of these economies, and all these economies are so heavily dependent on water flow that attempts to build dams to shape the direction of water have an immense impact downstream as far away as Vietnam, Laos, and beyond, and adding to the complexities of that exist in the region. I would say, drawing a bit on what, but water also is an immense force because it gives the possibility of hydropower and the potential to modernize dramatically, and so it, when handled properly, can be a force for good if handled in a ecologically responsible manner when dealing with one's partners downstream. Let me note in terms of the region itself that I think that drawing on in part on what His Holiness said during his remarks, that there are, I think, 6 major factors that affect the economy of the region. One is the overriding quest for water, which there's a shortage of in almost all of the countries in the region, in particular in China. The need for significant much greater electrical generation as countries modernize. That's an incredible challenge as we move to cell phones in villages where people don't have electricity. When the cell phone becomes sort of the absolutely necessary gateway to the world, to commerce, the need for much better infrastructure, and oftentimes the significant challenges that are posed by the harsh weather in the region pose a challenge to infrastructure, as does the broader poverty that is faced in the region. The move towards urbanization, which is also driving the need for increased infrastructure, the need for greater capital to undertake infrastructure projects, and the plight of possible human capital outflows from the region as people seek better opportunities elsewhere. Now, these economic forces really tend to play with each other, and there's a massive interplay between all of these, as we've seen on the issue of water, as we've seen on the issue of hydroelectricity. One country could modernize, and that modernization could occur at the expense of another country, the ability to move forward. And so, very rapidly, let me just make a few quick points about each of the economies of the region. China is obviously the world's second largest economy in terms of GDP. The workforce, a third of the workforce is in manufacturing, a third is in agriculture, a third is in services. This differs significantly, and with the modernization, it means immense demands for electricity, for infrastructure, and the like. India is the world's 7th largest economy by GDP, but half of India's workers remain in agriculture, and India needs to move, I would argue, though, with all due respect, that India needs to move to greater high-yield agriculture that would take better advantage of using less water in agriculture. Only 11% of jobs in India come out of manufacturing. India is now currently moving towards a greater liberalization of its labor laws under Prime Minister Modi. This is clearly an important factor as it moves forward, but India and China are in a period of what I would call strategic economic competition throughout the region, that India has had for some time significant cultural and economic ties throughout history, particularly to nations with significant Buddhist populations, but China has now become much more aggressive, as we heard from His Holiness, through its Silk Road efforts to reshape trade throughout the region, with China putting heavy emphasis on putting money into infrastructure projects both in China and outside of China, including in Nepal. In terms of the other countries of the region, Nepal is heavily tied to India's economy. Nepal is a source of significant energy generation for India, but it is a country that has, because of its water resources, but it's a country where 25% of the population lives below the poverty line. It has one of the weakest infrastructures. It is obviously isolated, mountainous, and nearly 80% of the workforce is in agriculture, which poses challenges. Bhutan is a country that obviously lies between India and China, 170,000 people, a landlocked nation. It also is highly economically linked with India, which provides financial assistance, trade, migrant workers. Bhutan is also a significant source of hydroelectric power for India, and there are 4 new deals that have been signed for Bhutan to produce energy for India. And it too faces many of the infrastructure problems that Nepal faces. Myanmar is a country which India is starting to, India increases outreach to. Obviously, Myanmar enjoyed preferential ties to China for some time. It is also one of the poorest economies in Asia, 60 million people living in poverty. A country that is now starting to open up to the West, looking for investment in infrastructure and the like. It obviously has has vast natural resources, a young workforce, and an ability to grow significantly in the next few years if Western investment comes in and if the investment is done properly. Let me simply note very quickly with regard to Pakistan that obviously Pakistan has been, shall we say, a problem child in the region for some time. I defer to my colleague, Ambassador Husain Haqqani. You can speak about the Pakistani economy. Let me simply note in terms of this issue of Pakistan's immense need for infrastructure, its place in this geostrategic competition with India, and also with regard to China, that China has significantly increased its outreach to Pakistan on infrastructure issues. We just saw the visit of Xi Jinping to Pakistan, and there are going to be major infrastructure deals that China is going to be investing in Pakistan that are seen as some sort of a attempt to rebalance the region as India and Japan become closer economic partners. All in all, let me simply note that the economic complexities of the region are significant, that the geostrategic factors, in addition to ecological ones, play in as well, and making and the countries are so closely interrelated that everything from water supply to electrical supply to trade to the repression of religious minorities all has an impact, and it's something we need as Americans to watch much more closely.
Thank you so much, Ken. Really a broad sweep coverage of not just the economy of the region, but also the very complex strategic issues which confront the countries in the region. We will be covering a lot more of that in the second session, but thank you for giving us such a broad oversweep view of this all. Now let me pass on to Mr. Mauskar, who has been very much part of the climate change negotiations. He's part of the Observer Research Foundation and has been India's prime negotiator for climate change. The Himalayas, as you all know, occupy a very sensitive position. There's a lot of literature talk which keeps coming about as to what has been happening in the region. This is something at the intersection of development and ecology. You call it an intersection, you call it a collision, or whichever way you want to look upon it. There is a huge amount of activity which also goes on in the Himalayas, where you see that, yes, there is, on the one hand, the impulse to build a large infrastructure, but then who is the infrastructure being built for? And what is the purpose of the infrastructure being built for? Who is it servicing? Who is it serving? These are all questions which become very important. So let me pass on to Mr. Mauskar to look at it from the ecology point of view, the ecological point of view, and the larger changes which are happening. 2013 saw one of the biggest and most devastating floods to hit one part of the region. We've just seen the devastation which has happened in Nepal. So over to you, Mr. Mauskar.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay. To begin with, I must thank ORF and Hudson Foundation, which have made it possible to get me all the way from India here. Now, I mean, Himalayas, what I would like to point out, because many other aspects already have been said, Himalayas are called the third pole. You have North Pole, you have got South Pole. Himalayas are the third pole. And the reason is that not only Himalayas are the largest accumulation of snow and ice, but in that part of the world, the rains don't come throughout the year. The rains come concentrated in the monsoon season, that's 3 months, July, August, September. What does the farmer do in the plains? In the summer, the ice and snow melt, and they supply some very valuable source of water. Second is Himalayas are unique ecosystem, flora and fauna. Third, to be noted about Himalayas is the geological fragility. Himalayas are the youngest mountain chain in the world. They are composed of limestone. Limestone is not very good building material. But more important than that, and that was demonstrated last month, the Indian plate is colliding with the Eurasian plate, and roughly every 50 years there is a major earthquake. Major means more than Richter scale 8 or so. And in the recorded history, the cycle is 50 years. It starts from somewhere north of Pamir in the north. Then it comes east up to the syntaxial bend. Now, where the earthquakes will hit, I mean, it's anybody's guess, but one thing is sure that Indian plate continues to slide under the Eurasian plate. Now, this being so, how has the mankind been impacting Himalayas? Now, climate change can be global, but the local climate change which is happening for last, let's say, 200 years is due to massive deforestation. Like, somebody was talking of infrastructure. The construction of Indian railways led to cutting of about, 20 million, 30 million trees, because between the two iron rails, there is a wooden tie. Millions of trees were cut. Increase of human population, fertilizers, pesticides, they have led to hillsides being converted into farms. So population pressure. The dams have been constructed, hydroelectric dams, multi-purpose hydroelectric dams. We are very proud of them. But as a result, there is hardly any perennial river. Perennial rivers are those rivers which flow throughout the year. All the rivers are seasonal. Now, on top of all this stress, now the anthropogenic climate change has come. As you are aware, greenhouse gases act as a blanket around the earth and they heat up the atmosphere. Not very much, 2 to 4 degrees, but 2 to 4 degrees average conceals in it lots of variations. And so far as Indian subcontinent is concerned, so far as Himalayas are concerned, still the debate is there that has the climate signal sort of manifested itself. Because there was lots of talk in the newspapers that the Himalayan glaciers are melting and it is due to the climate change. But life is seldom so simple. The Himalayan glaciers have been melting for last 150 to 200 years. The British conquerors, they wrote detailed diaries. And from that we know that there is a natural variability to the glaciers. But yes, there is a superpose on that, some variability of melting of Himalayan glaciers. And the fear is that if the glaciers disappear, if not, or they reduce, what happens to the water in summer in the Indo-Gangetic plain or wherever all these 7 river systems are. The second manifestation of climate change would be in the variability of monsoons. Monsoon is a very complex and a very energetic phenomena. But then there are averaging, when you take large geographical areas, the variability would mean there will be very intense rain, maybe for 2 hours, maybe for 3 hours, which is what happened in 2013. And the river systems and the human settlements, mostly on the floodplains, are not designed to handle these kind of cloud bursts. The irreversible damage to ecosystems caused by deforestation, caused by agriculture, will also be susceptible to these kind of fluctuations in rains. So what do we do? Now, I'm aware of what the neighboring countries are thinking and doing, and India, I was associated with our response to climate change, especially in Himalayan region. You'll be surprised with all these satellites and so many scientists and all. Knowledge about Himalayas, the solid knowledge, is not there. These are very remote, hostile areas. When you go to the, what you call is inner Himalayas, it may take scientists months of trekking to reach somewhere and then to make observations and come back. So what we decided in India was that first we'll have observation and monitoring network on some kind of 24/7 kind of a basis, that where are we? And then you do ground truthing, because satellite imagery is very attractive to look at it, but when you do ground truthing, the truth may be something else. This is what we found. Another response we thought was that enough of individual heroism or individual efforts. We need to bring back the community-based management of ecosystems. Now, how it is to be done, because government doesn't work well in these kind of community-based systems. How it is to be done is something else, but at the government level, we realize we need to bring back the community-based management. The pesticide, fertilizer kind of driven farming in Himalayas is deadly. So, I mean, how it is to be done again is a big question mark, but maybe organic farming, maybe more eco-friendly farming. The deforestation in Himalayas has already taken place. We are not as lucky as Brazil that by reducing their deforestation, they are managing to fulfill their climate targets and also sort of help the world. But another target we thought was that maybe 66% of Himalayas, wherever the forests were there, 66% afforestation. The last point, now that is where I'll tie up with what Dr. Weinstein was saying, geostrategic, geopolitical, and so on and so forth. In the climate negotiations, there is a phrase called intended nationally determined contributions, that each nation decides what they want to contribute towards combating the climate change. Because like, the country I am sitting here don't want anybody to tell them what to do. And same it is in the country I come from. The problem is that in Himalayas, where the political boundaries are artificial and Himalayas are a natural feature, how would the nationally determined contributions tie up to make, let's say, a Himalayan contribution, Himalayan not in size, but Himalayan in coverage? Now, that is a conundrum which I guess we'll be facing after Paris, because Paris is supposed to be the destination for some kind of a climate agreement, what the world will do between 2020 to 2030. But between then, that is 2015 and 2020, I think we have 4 years, and somewhere we have to put together the act that the Himalayan countries, India, China, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, even maybe affected countries like Bangladesh, how do they put their act together so that their nationally determined contributions relating to Himalayas do add up, that the whole becomes more than the part. So that is the challenge before us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mauskar, for covering this very, very complex issue where there are no very simple and straightforward answers on the whole ecological question which is confronting the Himalayas. You mentioned something very pertinent, but you said that when we are trying to study the Himalayas, we still find that our knowledge of these areas is so rare. The areas are so remote that probably we need to build more observing stations. Probably we need to, get into more detailed kind of studies of the region to go forward. Maybe we have not really been thinking out of the box. Probably the solution is to start thinking outside the box. And answers do not necessarily come from scientists in white coats and sitting in labs all the time. Answers come from various other sources. And for that, we have someone with us today, Arvind Gupta, who heads the IT cell of BP, who always has been, who's led Modi's campaign, which the whole world today is following. Every politician wants to follow Modi's campaign in the elections. But what he's here for that is not to tell us about Modi's campaign. He is one person who understands concepts of crowdsourcing, who understands concepts of how local knowledge systems can be used, and modern technology perhaps be used to devise ways and methodologies which moves away from traditional solutions of knowledge generation, knowledge management. That is one aspect of it. The other is there is so much traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems, repositories lying in these areas. Now, how can we move forward, perhaps rethink ways, because these are community-based systems. You need to redefine what IPR is. You need to redefine what intellectual property is. There are a lot of collisions happening there also when you talk of strategic moves, global moves, trade regimes. There's a lot of collision happening there also. So let me pass on to Arvind Gupta to tell us something about your knowledge of how health systems operate, how crowdsourcing operates, and what is the way forward with the Himalayas.
Thank you, Sanjay. I will start off with some anecdotes from the campaign and relate to the Himalayas. And it also shows the current thinking in the regime in New Delhi about the Himalayas. About a year and a half ago, the Himalayan belt, and if you see the two main regions that fall in India, from the north east and the northwest of India, have never been very built in to the Indian political system. The reason being that very difficult to access, very difficult to reach out to, and the dividends were never there. The political dividends were never there. So vastly ignored, mostly locally, whatever the politics would happen, that those representatives would reach New Delhi. But how I'm relating to that is very interesting. We were given a mandate that we have to reach out to every single person in that region, and to make sure that they understand what New Delhi, the new regime in New Delhi, means for them, and that was a mandate given to us. We went and surveyed the region as much as we could, both on the northeast side, the Arunachal side, and as well as where His Holiness has a lot of following in the Ladakh region. And when we went there, two things, very interesting aspects came out. The reception was overwhelming. People were more than willing to understand and engage in a conversation, which was very heartening. The challenge then remained second is how do you reach out to them, given the vastness and the disparsity of people spread all across. The quest for information was the same, absolutely the same, and the desire to get information, desire to engage was as much as anybody else would have in the rest of the country, and that was very, very heartening. So what we did in the campaign, during the campaign period, was very remarkable. We used technology. And if you've seen the Star Wars, the Star Wars, or any science fiction, you saw the 3D holograms and the people getting beamed from one place to another place. One of the big things about the last year's campaign was the whole use of hologram and the 3D holograms, where the Prime Minister would speak at a particular place in Delhi, but we could create 100 to 150 such replicas in real time, 3D replicas that were speaking to an audience like this in the whole of the unreachable areas. And the primary target of such hologramic 3D conversations were the belts in the Himalayan region. And the response was overwhelming. People appreciated the fact that somebody made an effort to come to them, use latest technology. And this technology, if you've not seen, I would encourage you to do Narendra Modi 3D on a YouTube. You'll find it amazing. It's real time, it's real. And if people had, I was part of the crowd in a couple of these speeches. People, the audience did not believe that Prime Minister did not attend in person. They had disputes with the local organizers that you did not want me to shake hand with the future Prime Minister. That's why you didn't let, you said that he is coming on a 3D. It's not true. The impact of that was multifold. The outcome was multifold. This was part of the campaign. The impact was both electoral dividend. For the first time, we actually won Ladakh. Shift in thinking of New Delhi. We won Ladakh by 35 votes, actually, the closest election ever. And we won in Arunachal, the northeast part of India. The current Deputy Minister for Home is from Arunachal, by the way. That was political dividend. The other thing that happened is that in the national vision that we set out for the party, a very important thing was set, and I'm sure my colleagues in the next session are going to discuss it a lot more, but one aspect which was very important is to set up the Himalayan Institute for two areas. One is how digital and technology can be used as a lever to increase jobs. And His Holiness mentioned the mountains cannot be without people. If there is going to be urbanization and people movement away from the mountains seeking jobs, our vision is how we can use the digital economy. And that is the very contrary way of looking at it, a new way of looking at it. So what areas we are working on is using digital as a lever, as technology as a lever to create jobs there, to ensure knowledge systems from the Himalayan region are taken to the world. That community IP, the crowdsourced IP, that the awareness is created globally about that. And we believe that technology can be used as a massive lever in that. This is the game change, one of the game changers. I always say, while we are going to construct the physical infrastructure in that region, and it has strategic geopolitical advantages, the current regime is very, very eager to set up state-of-the-art, a leapfrogged digital infrastructure and create a digital economies, a knowledge system around the digital platform. We've launched the world's biggest digital inclusion program called Digital India. India today is second or third in the use of digital systems globally. But the percentage is not second or third. We are about 25% connected, 75% still to be unconnected. But the charter is to ensure that every single part of India is connected. I was not speaking there, by the way. There was no 3D hologram there. To build this digital infrastructure and include the remotest part of the Himalayan regions in that, to bring about, and I'll bring about 3 or 4 issues that I heard since morning. People move away from these towns because they don't get the right facilities in terms of jobs, right education, and right healthcare. This is the 3 big data points: jobs, education, and healthcare. And that is the plan that we, again, the second point we did in the national vision for that the party set out during the elections, and which is now the document, the vision document for the country, because we thankfully won the elections, is something called Rurban. Now this is a new terminology, Rurban, urban. This is providing the rural India urban facilities, and that is our attempt to provide urban level jobs, infrastructure, jobs, healthcare, and education to rural India using digital connectivity. So e-education, telemedicine, so that people stay there. There are jobs. I'm going to discuss jobs also shortly. And that is the first step. So digital connectivity as a base and providing content in real time with respect to education, and of course telemedicine-based healthcare, and physical infrastructure will be built together. This we believe has the power to invert the pyramid and really create a level playing field when it comes to innovation, marketing this innovation globally, creating opportunities of job and commerce. We've seen this. While we have opened up digital economy centers or digital economies, the rural India is the one that has benefited incrementally the most. The have-nots have really benefited the most. They've been able to open markets globally for it. They've been able to sell their products globally. They've been able to collaborate on the IP that Sanjay, that you were mentioning about, and package that as a marketable product. The 2-3 areas that we feel really the knowledge systems are so deep and so can provide leadership to the rest of the world is, of course, in the area of alternative medicine and health. The medicinal benefits, both the use of technology to do a verification and validation of FDA equivalent for alternative medicine. A technology-enabled FDA equivalent for all alternative medicine. And seeing that these are FDA approved or equivalent approved products and taking them to the world. That's part of the vision. Really taking local innovation, and this has been the traditional system of medicine for many years, but never has been taken globally, and that's one of the things. And of course, the second lever, where technology will provide local employment jobs, is tourism. The story, the awareness of a lot of sub-communities has not been told to the world. And once digital connectivity comes about, and we have many cases, many examples in India where the moment they were connected on a system, they were able to get a much higher realization for their products, which may be tourism, could be their B&Bs. So tourism and health are the two key first few challenges that we want to use from the region to sell to the world, really, from make in Himalaya to sell to the world. And that's part of our Make in India philosophy also. So the last thing I do want to mention is this brings about this whole thing of, how do you create the power of networks? How do you create a brand awareness for this region? And Sanjay, to your mention, this is that crowdsourcing of and making, stringing all these small pearls together and making a larger brand for the region rather than smaller brands in the sub-regions. So the technology can really help in creating a bigger community, integrated community, an integrated brand, if you may call, rather than small sub-brands. And that's one of the things that we think will work very well for the region. To just sum it up, I think it's the current regime is, very clear on using digital as a lever for throughout the country, and the Himalayan region even so more, because it has a lot to not only receive but also to give, especially in areas of tourism and health. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Arvind. And you put a very interesting proposition before us that perhaps the digital economy can do what the traditional economy could not manage to do. One, in a way, did marginalize huge swathes of populations. Perhaps digital economy can step in to make those corrections. It's a very important insight. Let us see where we move on this. Now let me come to our last speaker and our main speaker. We heard him in the morning. Temples, spirituality have always been such a big draw in the Himalayas. And people, yes, I spoke about, going back to the hills, going back to the mountains, to rejuvenate yourself, to discover spiritual roots and spiritual linkages. Now, sir, my question to you is a bit different. My question to you, Holiness, is that there are, a lot of people who do keep coming back. It's a syndrome of going back home, going back to your roots, having moved out, having become empowered, having acquired power, having acquired privileges. Then you go back to the to your temples, your monasteries, and try to reassert maybe ownership, maybe try to reclaim, try to reclaim roots. Now that itself, I think, does create a certain kind of disruption as far as in the local communities. What are your views on that?
Spirituality. When you talk about the spirituality, I think it reminds me of talking about spirituality is being a backbone of religion and diversity. Like of religion, like a living all the different sorts of religious people together harmoniously, is fully depends on the spirituality. It's not depends on the religiosity. If you are very much fully sort of like a controlled and sort of like a sort of influenced by the religion. No matter what sort of religion, maybe it's a Buddhist, maybe Hindu, maybe the Christianity, maybe Islamic. Anyway, any religion, if you bound or if you sort of like if you put yourself into a kind of a cage of a religion, then of course you cannot really. I don't see any sort of a future of a living harmoniously, because I'm in a Buddhist cage, you are in a Muslim cage, and he's in a Christian cage. There's we all will have a sort of different cage, so we cannot really stretch our legs and our arms, and the relaxation will not be able to do it, and especially will not be able to understand and cooperate together. I don't think so, because all the religion has a different way. Like for example, my dress is such a unique dress, and this is very much a religion, and I think nobody really wears this dress unless you are a Buddhist and you are Drukpa lineage, Drukpa follower, or Drukpa religion, if you like. Even though we don't call ourselves religion, but of course, if you like, you can call it. So, and other Christian priests will have another unique kind of dress, and Hindu masters have a unique dress and unique colors and all these things. And all the masters and all the religion, different religion has a different dress, different color, different sort of ritualities, etc., etc. So all these things, I think, fanatically, if you are caught up with it, then I call it a golden cage of a religion. You are in a cage. So this is the reason why, of course, I was very happy when you speak about the spirituality. Spirituality. What really spirituality is like? Really, your body is the temple, and your mind is really the sangha, the yogi, the practitioner, like a sannyasian, and whoever, like a monk, and the nun, female. If you are a female, your mind is really the nun, and if you are male, your mind is the monk. So the temple is, of course, the Buddha. The body is really the temple. So you have to really respect that way. I think that is really the beauty of it, and the beauty of Himalayas, I would say. That is one of the reasons why I said this morning that the Himalaya has a really sort of like a good reputation, so to speak, to sort of like they have been able to sort of embrace very well all the different religions very well. I mean, even though maybe there are some dispute, or I don't know, some fanatic people feel quite uncomfortable with the other religion and all these things. Of course, we are being human beings, so human being has a human nature. So of course we'll have a problem. But actually, the spirituality is really the beauty of the Himalaya, and the beauty of the Himalaya is not only the mountain and all these things. But of course, this is what people say, the tourist who goes there. Oh, the Himalayas are very beautiful and very nice people because they are closer to the God, because it's a higher mountain. The mountain is high, so high enough to sort of speak with the God and all these things. But of course, this is being maybe it's I listen to these kind of things as a poetry. You know, it's like it's not true. Of course, I don't believe in the God being somewhere high up in the nearby Himalaya. I don't believe in that. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Whatever you believe doesn't matter. Whatever I believe doesn't matter. But the spirituality really is the understanding of the art of embracing each other. That is the thing. And so back to Himalaya, like for example, like the spirituality, of course, is the beauty, but now the education is very much the infrastructure that it's needed. Because if the education is not there, then you cannot really understand what is the spirituality. And that's the reason why all the Hindu, all the Muslim, all the Buddhist also, now there are many difficult situations happening in Burma, and many other places also. Even the Buddhist people also, they do some nasty things. That is like because of the people are being a human being, and then caught up with the fanaticism. So therefore, education is so important. So that's the reason why education is so important, to keep the spirituality, the beauty of the Himalaya, and beauty of everybody, and also not only that. I mean, to keep the nature intact. For example, not to have a what do you call that, the cloud burst, not to have a landsliding, and not to have a global warming. All these things that depends on very much depends upon the human being, the human who and depends on the education. Because of the lack of education, we are ignorant how to look after the nature, and the nature is not so important for us actually. If you are not educated, if you are educated, means like if you are really sort of spiritually educated, then of course spiritual educated means that your life needs to be understood. And so I'm not trying to say that this you have to be educated to be Hindu, to be Buddhism, to be Buddhist, and to be Islamic. I'm not saying a specific religion, but spiritual means you have to know, you have to educate it enough to know how important to respect everybody, every nature. That is very much the spirituality. So that is I would say it is very much the beauty of the Himalaya.
Thank you so much, Your Holiness, and that very, very important lesson which you've drawn, the distinction between spirituality and religiosity. And yes, the Himalayas represent that spirituality, and that's really what they will always be remembered for, and that is why people need and keep on going back to them. We have some very brief, very short time now for quick comments or discussions, just about 5 minutes, because we are running a bit late. So if there are any quick questions, let us take them. I'll take them in groups. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm a visiting scholar in CIC, based in NYU. I come from China. So I have a question for Your Holiness Gyalwang. You said that during your speech, you rightly mentioned that Ladakh benefited from the thrive of the Silk Road, while suffers also from the decline of the Silk Road. So nowadays, the Chinese government wants to revive this kind of Asian Silk Road. A lot of investment, a lot of projects for Nepal. There will be China Nepal Railway, I think, in the near future. There are Kodari, there are Pilong, or at the border trade towns. I talked about the India, we have the BCI, we link the northeast part of India to the southwest part of China through Myanmar and Bangladesh. We also have this kind of project. So that my question is that how do you evaluate the future of this kind of new Silk Road? In fact, we do not call that a new Silk Road. We call that one belt, one road. That means Silk Road economic belt. So that how do you evaluate the future of this belt, and what the impact do you think it will have on the Pan-Himalaya region, including Nepal, Bhutan, India, Pakistan, and China?
Actually, that question takes us into the next session, but we'll see what can be done about that here. Yes, madam.
Hi, my name is Contessa Bourbon. I write for the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. I'd like to ask, how can technology be harnessed to help in rehabilitation and relief of those people victimized by the tragic earthquake? Can Mr. Gupta and His Holiness reply at the other panels?
That's a tough one. Because technology, I think, can, in the rehabilitation of people affected, first of all, if you go a step back, technology played a very effective role, in my opinion, in the efforts to connect people during relief, during the whole rescue and relief operations. Going forward, I think, while there is a lot of physical need for building a lot of physical infrastructure, again, a lot of homes got destroyed, I think, it goes back to my point of using technology to create jobs, to create that, to make sure that people stick and remain in their own local communities, but have the opportunities globally. I think that will play a very important role. The third part is going forward. I think this real-time monitoring of the ground truthing that Mr. Mauskar mentioned, I think is very imperative. The ground data using latest technology has to be encouraged a lot. Data at 40,000 feet level, and I'm not referring to the height of the mountains, but at a very high level is not helping. So a lot of ground data is required, and one of the things I can mention now based on your question is that there is a lot of intent to set up ground monitoring, real-time monitoring systems with the help of the local community. So I think that will help in sustaining in the long term.
Ken, can I quickly ask you to come? We are discussing the Silk Road more, I think, in this session of strategy, but if you can quickly say 2 sentences about it.
The
economic linkages, the strategic linkages, yeah.
Yeah, well, China has engaged in a significant effort to build infrastructure, build closer trade relations with its neighbors, both by land, heading into Central Asia, and then obviously through the Himalayas, as there's construction being talked of the tunnel to Nepal to link the region more closely, and there are concerns of disruption of particular communities and greater concern about what China's strategic aims are through the Silk Road effort, which is different than the original Silk Road, as His Holiness pointed out earlier, which was more of an organically derived area of trade. May I ask? I wanted to ask His Holiness a question. We talked about, you spoke very beautifully about the golden cage that people have around them, often from religion, that sort of sets them apart from others. But I wanted to get your sense of whether these devices, whether technology itself, can present a kind of golden cage that can separate us as well. And I was wondering if you might talk about the challenge of technological advancement. The challenge that poses to spirituality.
The technologies, for example, mobile and all these things, obviously there are many people in this world speaks very bad about the technologies also. But I mean, maybe there are some the bad things are happening also because of high technology. But just now, what I'm saying, what I would say is that the good thing that really the technology, these gadgets, they really did is, of course, to break through the golden cage. And now we are really like we can shake hand, not just physically, but of course through the internet and all these things. We can definitely understand each other. This is what I always say, that the understanding is something that is a very, very crucial. You know, for Hindu to understand Buddhism, Buddhism to understand Hindu, and the Hindu and the Buddhism both has to understand the Islamic religion, and Islamic people or followers has to understand about the other religion. So therefore they will not be sort of like killing each other. They will not be sort of abusing each other because of understanding. So these understanding really really understanding provides by these internets. I mean, so therefore internet sometime I see is as a great tool to sort of like break through the golden cage, and where is no, you know, we have no internet or no way, then of course we don't understand each other. So that's the reason why we are really like having a lot of problems. The different religion sees each other as an enemy, not as a friend, for long time, for long generations and generations. So nowadays I think thanks to internet and all these things, I think good things about the internet. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holiness, and very absolutely correctly that technology is an instrument. It depends on us what use we make of it, and the use, yes, is to get back to the greater spirituality which unites all of us. Thank you so much, Your Holiness. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mr. Mauskar. Thank you, Arvind, for sharing this panel with me. It's been a privilege.
Thank you all for taking seats. When I lived at I should begin, I suppose, by introducing myself. I'm Scooter Libby from the Hudson Institute. And I wanted to point out that when I lived at 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains, we used to speak somewhat derisively, I must say, about flatlanders. So I feel a great affinity for His Holiness from the heights and his delegation. But I also should note the presence of some notable flatlanders here among us. Of course, President of Hudson Institute, Ken Weinstein, who you heard from just a little while ago, and also our chairperson from the heights of Westchester County, who I think is here somewhere, Sarah Stern. I also should note this remarkable audience, which I've had a little chance to speak with on the margins of this session and some the other night. And it is truly remarkable for its expertise and the scope of its wisdom and cross-cultural understanding. And I must say that the affinity I felt for His Holiness almost immediately upon meeting him gives me great hope that I will one day understand Southern Californians. Dr. Joshi mentioned that the answers do not always come from the men in white coats. And it reminded me that in 1969, as our astronauts were picking up their air conditioning units and heading towards the launch pad, our leading scientists were discovering that their calculations about the universe didn't work. It turned out they were a fraction off. The fraction they were off was 95%. I always wondered if they went up and told the astronauts, or if, as they were hanging upside down in the capsule, by the way, we really don't understand very much about the universe at all, and our 10b-5 disclosure requirements having been met. So, what do you do when you don't understand 95% of the universe? Well, the scientists had a solution, and that was to make up a name for the rest of it. And so they came up with the term dark matter and the term dark energy to explain everything that they didn't understand. And what is the nature of this dark matter? Well, the nature was whatever it had to be to make their calculations work out. And we call this the scientific method. If we had sinified that, we might call it yin and yang, but this would make for some unusual footnotes in scientific papers. In the spring of 2015, His Holiness was welcomed at CERN, the Center for Advanced Nuclear Research in Europe. And it was a session that they called Science Meets Buddhism, Great Minds, Great Matters. So a sub-theme of this was that both science and spirituality deal with perceptions of reality. And the deeper we look into reality, the more bizarre it becomes, and the more spiritual the answers become. America's founders believed in another great link between spirituality, and that being between spirituality and good governance. They wrote the Constitution not to bar spirituality, but to protect it so that it would protect us. All of our founders sought to grasp the hand of wisdom that comes from something greater than man's linear knowledge. They did this not just to handle uncertainty, but to serve moral ends as they progressed. There's a fundamental geopolitical challenge that we face. Until CERN discovers time travel, we have to live time moving forward. Looking backward, it's very easy to know what we should have done about the Soviet Union, or about the National Socialists, or about the Holy Roman Emperor, or about the Persian Empire. Looking forward, few knew what we had to do. Today we face uncertainty as well. There was reference earlier to the Chinese strategy of one belt, one road, which has a nice ambiguity built into it. A belt can be something which surrounds something usefully. It can also mean a punch. What bothers me more than the ambiguity in belt is the ambiguity in the sense that there's only one road. Peering through the dark matter of geopolitics, we seek to do the right thing. Spirituality may be our best guide to doing this as we combined security and morality in the search of where to head for a shifting reality. T.S. Eliot said that anyone could carve a goose if it weren't for the bones. Today we have with us 4 great goose carvers who may also tell us whose geopolitical goose is being cooked. So when we're hanging upside down in our capsule as we head off into the next couple decades, knowing that we only understand 5% of what lies ahead, we'll be able to look back on these 4 gentlemen as having been our best guides. We have with us Ashok Malik, who will speak about the domestic aspects of the critical states in the Indian Himalayan region. He is the Australia-Indian Institute Chair for Indo-Pacific Studies. He's also a leading journalist for various Indian and international publications. He looks at the maritime and energy security in the region and the institutional architecture of the Indo-Pacific region. He's the author of a book, India, Spirit of Enterprise, which examines the role of the private sector in the economy. We also have with us Eric Brown, one of my colleagues who will discuss China's western advance into Central Asia, Tibet and Nepal, and its intentions for the region. Eric has been looking at this for some time as a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he focuses on the Middle East, North Africa, East Asia, and the Pacific. He's an expert on terrorism and radical ideologies and a co-editor of Current Trends in Islamist Ideology. I must also say that when Hudson does the remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Eric is most likely to be found with a pickaxe and a compass going down the valleys of the Himalayas. We have with us, as you all have met earlier, Ambassador Husain Haqqani, who will provide the overview of Pakistan's relations in the region. He's also a senior fellow and director for South and Central Asia at our institute. He served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2011. And I would say about him that he is also a man of great courage. He put himself at great personal risk to secure a better future for his country, and it's something we should all admire him greatly for. And finally, Dr. Raja Mohan, who will discuss the potential and challenges for India posed by China and its Silk Road diplomacy. He serves as the head of strategic studies at the Observer Research Foundation. He's a regular columnist for the India Express. He's a non-resident senior associate in the Carnegie Endowment South Asia program, with great expertise on the region on foreign and defense policy issues. So let us strap ourselves in, be ready for takeoff, and I'll turn it over to the panel.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the Hudson Institute and the Observer Research Foundation and His Holiness the Drukpa for inviting me here and inviting all of us here for what is proving to be a very educative session. At least the first session was very educative for me, and so was His Holiness's address. I'm here to speak on the domestic aspects of the Himalayan phenomenon, as it were, in Indian politics, society, and economic development. These have changed in the past few months and past couple of years. There has been a rethinking in the way we imagine the Himalayas and the potential we see in them, which is what I'm here to explain. Of course, my colleague, Dr. Raja Mohan, will speak about the broader foreign policy challenges, which will complement what I'm trying to say, hopefully. Historically, the Himalayas have been seen with a great degree of reverence by Indians, but also, I would argue, with a certain strategic defensiveness, as a border, as a wall, as an end rather than a beginning. This is despite the fact that the Himalayas have been a traditional trading route, but broadly, the Himalayas were where Indian civilization ended and the Chinese civilization began. And frankly, they were a barrier. The degree of osmosis expected between two great and ancient civilizations was just not anywhere close to its potential, and which is why historically India and China have actually known so little about each other, because the natural wall of the Himalayas became a perceptual wall as well. Till 1962, when we had a border war with China, the Himalayas were also a natural boundary protecting India militarily. Of course, that has changed with modern warfare and modern threats. In the past few years, we've begun to reimagine the Himalayas. Rather than see it in defensive terms, there is recognition that more than a border to defend, it's a frontier to exploit. It's an economic frontier, it's a social frontier, it's a geographical frontier blooming with opportunities. And much like the Indian Ocean, it is a peripheral geography, the strategic salience of which the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is eager to tap into. While researching my talk this morning, for this morning's session, I came across a very interesting fact which is very relevant to our discussion today. Ladakh, where His Holiness is based, is actually very central to a pressing Indian concern, which is its border negotiations with China. Indian and Chinese governments have been negotiating the exact demarcation of their border ever since both countries became independent or became republics in the late 1940s. And that negotiation actually goes back over 100 years to the time when the British were negotiating on India's behalf with the Chinese emperor. Various documents and various precedents have been cited in the course of that long, protracted negotiation, which has not been resolved yet and which represents one of the world's last major unresolved land border disputes. In the 1950s, one of the documents which the government of India cited in its favor while negotiating with the Chinese was the Treaty of Mauskar. I hope I pronounced it correctly. This treaty, which was both a land boundary agreement as well as a bilateral trade agreement, goes back to the year 1684. It was signed between the King of Ladakh and the lamas in Tibet, in Lhasa. And depending on how you interpret this treaty of 1684, India decides where its boundary is and China decides where its boundary or Tibet's boundary is. It's very meaningful and a very interesting coincidence that the person who negotiated the Treaty of Mauskar on behalf of the King of Ladakh was His Holiness the 6th Drukpa, the predecessor and previous incarnation of His Holiness the 12th Drukpa. So this is something, and the lineage His Holiness represents is actually very, very important for a very contemporary political issue in India. Coming to more recent initiatives with the Modi government, the Modi government has replaced the Planning Commission, which has been central to developmental planning in our country in India for the past 50-odd years, with a new commission called the Policy Commission or the Niti Aayog. The Planning Commission had a top-down mandate with Delhi, the capital, deciding what the states would do, how they would sort of follow economic and social development plans. Niti Aayog imagines a more province-led, a more bottom-up approach. Part of this new approach is a clustering of states or provinces that have similar geographical, social, and economic challenges. One such cluster is going to be that of Himalayan states. Exact details are sketchy and not available because I spoke to a senior person at the Niti Aayog, at the Policy Commission before I came here, and he said there was an internal assessment as to the challenges of Himalayan states and how exactly the clustering of these states would happen. But going by what Prime Minister Modi himself has said in various public meetings and engagements, and as the previous speakers in the previous session did mention, seeking economic opportunities and creating jobs in the region, using tourism, exploiting the biodiversity of the Himalayas, particularly for traditional and herbal medicines, tapping into hydroelectricity, expanding room for trade with neighboring countries and regions by reopening or strengthening traditional and historical trade routes. All of these are part of the agenda. There is also a very compelling issue of infrastructure and capacity building, particularly with regard to disaster preparedness, because the Himalayas are beautiful, but they're also fragile. And they are, in India at least, locations of a very rapid and somewhat reckless urbanizing, which is leading to its own problems and challenges. We saw an example of this not in India but in Nepal recently, where very rapid and very rapid and reckless urbanizing actually accentuated the impact of the recent earthquake. We saw this in the devastating floods and landslides in the Indian state of Uttarakhand, which is also an Himalayan state, in 2013. We saw this in the Kashmir earthquake in 2005, which affected that part of Kashmir, which is with Pakistan. We saw it with the Pakistani floods of 2010. We saw it with the floods in Kashmir, in Indian Kashmir in 2014. Disaster preparedness, which is not just limited to one country, but is a cross-Himalayan problem, really, is central to Mr. Modi's approach and the Indian government's approach to working with the Himalayas, working in the Himalayas. In the case of Nepal, it was noticed that Indian support in the form of first responders, rescue and relief operations got to work very swiftly. We were on the ground very, very quickly. Now, this wasn't entirely unplanned, or it didn't happen by chance. Actually, as was mentioned in the previous session, technologists and seismologists, rather, have been anticipating an earthquake in the Nepal region, in the Himalayan region, for several years now. Historically, once in about 70 to 80 years, there's a big earthquake. The last big one was in 1934. And another earthquake was on the cards, though, of course, no one can predict earthquakes. It's interesting that in 2011, in Washington, D.C., India and the U.S. led an international effort to prepare and make preparations for a possible relief and rehabilitation effort in Nepal in case of an earthquake. This happened as recently as 2011, and obviously the work that went into that preparation after that conference of 2011 paid dividends in 2014. So this does tell us that disaster preparedness and actually talking things through for the Himalayas or perhaps any other region does actually bear fruit in times of great tragedy and can actually save lives. Infrastructure relates to making lives safer. Infrastructure also relates to making lives that much more meaningful, prosperous, and better. I refer, of course, to border infrastructure or Himalayan infrastructure that improves connectivity, telecom connectivity, road connectivity, rail connectivity. India's Himalayan regions, as Dr. Arvind Gupta mentioned, can become great incubators for innovation and technology, including for the information technology sector, which is so big in India and which has so many spin-off businesses. But better telecom links are very necessary. Without that, we can't really fulfill our potential. India's Himalayan regions can contribute as trade routes to China, to Tibet, to Central Asia, because they remain our final frontier, our final pathway to Central Asia. And Ladakh is just so important there because it connects Central Asia to India. To India's east, the Himalayan states in India can connect us to ASEAN countries, beginning with Myanmar. But all of this requires better train and road connectivity, because right now, border infrastructure is abysmal. The Modi government has announced some flagship projects to fill these gaps. In its first railway budget in 2014, the year it took office and won an election, it allocated 50 billion rupees towards railway projects in the largely Himalayan northeastern parts of our country. 50 billion rupees translates to about 800 million US dollars. That may not sound impressive on its own, but year on year, that represented a 54% increase in the budget for the northeastern region. Additionally, the Kashmir Railway, which will connect the Indian mainland to Baramulla in the Kashmir Valley, is in its final stages of completion. It's expected that it'll be ready in 2017. In the northeast alone, there are 23 major railway infrastructure projects currently underway, being paid for by that $800 billion budget, which was announced last year. Together, when these projects bear fruit and these projects reach a certain conclusion, and when the Kashmir Railway is complete, the Himalayan region, which has been to the periphery of India, will become much more integrated with the Indian economy and the Indian common market. Lastly, the Bharat Mala, which translates to the necklace of India, is a project that proposes to build a very long and robust border highway from India's western desert frontier right up to the Himalayan north and then to the eastern northeast, encompassing India's entire land perimeter. This is the most ambitious such idea in Indian history, in the 5,000 years of Indian history. We've never seen something like this. And it will actually link the entire land boundary of India. As and when it is completed, again, it will do wonders for integrating India's Himalayan periphery and Himalayan states with the mainland's economy and its common market. As you can see, these are very ambitious ventures, and they are generating great hopes that are almost as tall as the peaks of the Himalayas. I'll leave it there.
Eric?
Thank you.
when Dr. Pandey asked me to speak, she said, cram everything that I know into about 5 minutes, so I promise I'll speak very slowly. But there was a very nasty attack on the front page of a very famous think tank in Beijing, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, recently. The attack was on a group of American historians of the Qing Empire. They singled out these historians for writing history which was subversive of Chinese rule. The reason is that what the historians did is they went back and they looked at the history of the Manchu Empire, and they, of course, began with the assessment on the historical fact that the Manchus, of course, were not Chinese. They were an Inter-Asian people that entered into China proper, what historians used to call China proper, that is the historical Chinese-speaking lands of central, what we call China today, and established their rule over that part of Asia. And from there, the Manchus conducted a bunch of strategic campaigns to defend what was effectively the crown jewel of their imperium. And those strategic campaigns included marching westward, first deep into what was then known as East Turkestan, which eventually came to be known under the Qing rule as Xinjiang. And then from there, they also marched into Tibet. And so it was under Manchu rule, under non-Han Chinese rule, that China and Tibet were incorporated into one imperium and existed as, in a way, different parts of this imperium. We know from history that the relationships between the Himalayas, Tibet, and China were much, much more complex than that. I've traveled parts of the old Kunming-Lhasa highway, for example, and along that way you can collect all sorts of very interesting stories about old Tang princesses who have come to develop relationships with the locals. And of course, the trade and the cultural commerce, if you will, that took place between Tibet and China for across the centuries, was much, much more complex than most schoolboy histories can give a proper account of. And indeed, when in 1911, when the Xinhai Geming happened, it was China which was freed from somebody else's empire that came to be freed from the Manchu Empire. And as we know as well, Tibet enjoyed de facto sovereignty up until the 1950s, before it was forcibly integrated into the new Chinese empire called the People's Republic of China. Of course, the innovation that PRC introduced at that time was that Tibet had always been an integral part of China. And in fact, PRC also claimed that East Turkestan, or Xinjiang, was in fact an integral part of China. And so one of the reasons why this think tank is clearly attacking this group of American scholars who are trying to give an objective account of very interesting, complex relations between different polities over time on the Asian mainland is because what they're producing is a history that's very subversive of the CCP's claim that Tibet and Xinjiang have always been integral parts of the Chinese empire. These quarrels over history matter, mainly because it is on the basis of China's claim to Tibet that the PRC rejects the middle way proposed by the Dalai Lama, that Tibet should enjoy autonomy within the People's Republic of China. It's also on these grounds that they've attacked the minority rights campaigner in Xinjiang, Ilham Tohti, who, among other things, he's now in prison for terrorism charges when all he's been doing has been standing up for the rights of the minority Uyghurs in East Turkestan. In the PRC's language today, their national strategy language, both Tibet and Xinjiang are referred to as essential components of the great project of Chinese national rejuvenation. And when you look at the recent white paper produced by the Communist Party of China, they describe this in very chilling terms. The Chinese white paper on Tibet describes this in very chilling terms. They say, any person or force that attempts to resist the tide will simply be cast aside by history and by the people. We know what this means in practice. I think in the last few years, we've seen what began as a demographic and economic effort to, in a way, subjugate East Turkestan and Tibet has now given way to a much, much more sophisticated attack to obliterate cultural difference in these areas. In Xinjiang, shopkeepers are now forced, in Muslim Xinjiang, shopkeepers are now forced to sell alcohol and cigarettes. They're forced to open up their restaurants during Ramadan. In Tibet, all of you, I know, follow the situation there. I would, however, point you in the direction of comments made recently by the Chinese Panchen Lama. I don't mean to gainsay his practice of Buddhism, but this, of course, is a man who was appointed by the Chinese Communist Party in the late 1990s when the Chinese Communist Party asserted control over the cycles of reincarnation. He's an employee of the Chinese Communist Party. He raised a bit of a scandal in Beijing recently when he said that due to China's policies in Tibet, Buddhism is at risk of existing in name only. So what does all this mean for China's geopolitical ambitions, both in Tibet but also in Central Asia? We spoke a little bit earlier about the One Belt, One Road policy. This is a geopolitical project that I've been studying for some time. I sometimes imagine Lord Curzon, who famous in the English-speaking world for describing India as the pivot of Asia. I sometimes imagine him lamenting the fact that journalists and a lot of people today have used the word pivot to describe all manner of new kinds of strategic initiatives. I sometimes wonder if Curzon would feel that pivot used to be a useful term for geopolitical analysis, but now describes, I think, this general period of upheaval that we're living through. But whereas the U.S. has been, I think, very rudderless over the last few years and not very clear about what its strategic ambitions are, China has been acting with great purpose. The PRC, in fact, has been acting with great purpose. In recent weeks, we've seen that it's declared billions of dollars investment in implementing its One Road, One Belt policy. It essentially proceeds along two different routes. Xinjiang has been constituted in recent years not simply as a defensive zone, which is what it was in the 1950s and the 1960s for PRC strategic thinking, but now it's been constituted as a great gateway for Chinese expansion into Central Asia and into South Asia. Chinese strategists conceive of their project of building strategic infrastructure as connecting Xinjiang and, of course, China itself to the Baltic Sea within the next several decades. Actually, it's happened already. There are trains leaving Chongqing and dropping Chinese-made goods off in Rotterdam. This is a sign of, I think, large geopolitical shifts that are to come. Another aspect of the Silk Road, of this new road, of course, involves heavy investment in Pakistan, through which Chinese strategists describe an effort to build a great economic corridor which will bring Chinese power directly onto the doorstep of the Persian Gulf. They announced the recent $52 billion worth of investments. When you look at where these strategic infrastructure investments are going to take place, they take place along a very sort of slim backbone that stretches from Xinjiang down into Baluchistan, and it largely favors the development of the Punjab area of Pakistan, and there are already people who are worried that these kinds of investments might upset the prospects of Pakistan stabilizing itself around a federal political system. There are people within Pakistan and elsewhere that are worried that this introduction of large Chinese largesse is going to effectively facilitate the Punjabi colonization of Baluchistan, which, of course, parts of Pakistan has been fighting a protracted and very sad struggle with various Baluch separatist movements for several decades now. All of this raises some very important questions, which U.S. policy is still grappling with, and it's not quite clear yet how any of us should think about how to proceed. I mean, there's clearly great opportunity. When you crisscross a place like Central Asia, You can talk to strategists and other people in the governments in Central Asia who will say that greater Chinese investment, greater Chinese involvement in our national development is a good thing. Not only does it provide us with an opportunity to balance Russian revanchism, but PRC investment is finally going to unlock the potential of Central Asia and connect these economies to Europe and also to the advanced economies of East Asia. You hear a similar optimism, I think, in Pakistan. You hear it also in Southeast Asia. But then there's also this sense of dread, a concern that some of this investment is going to tilt quarrels which have been taking place in some of these countries in favor of, in very negative directions. The other thing, too, which we need to keep in mind is the more PRC makes these investments, the buildup of these large land ports which are being built in Chongqing and Kunming and elsewhere in interior China and western China, that places greater demand on the Himalayas to produce water and energy. And so we've seen, as a consequence of this great march west, greater demands on the limited natural resources of the Himalayas. And this is programmed to grow. These kinds of demands are programmed to grow as a consequence of these geopolitical initiatives that PRC has announced. So as a practical matter, how do we begin to think about some of these things? I think, among other things, beyond the discussions that the U.S. and India have had about nuclear cooperation, the next phase of those discussions needs to talk very seriously about bringing to India and other countries that live downstream of the Himalayas advanced desalination technologies. This is, I think, a matter of urgent importance for Indian agriculture and for the livelihoods of the many millions of people who benefit from the waters of the Himalayas downstream. I think there are other very practical strategic and military implications. I think the United States, for example, should take a very active interest in the development of the Indian 17th Corps as a kind of a deterrent for the kinds of PRC territorial claims that we've seen in different parts of the Himalayas over the last few years and which are likely to become we're likely to see more of in the coming years. But I think that these are all sort of defensive policy measures. The much more difficult thing is, of course, political. Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel laureate, said that the Himalayas, the Tibetan Himalayas, will not be free until China is free. And for observations like this, Liu Xiaobo has been placed under house arrest. But I think that does provide a very deep insight into what the kinds of political challenges we face going forward. I think the question, some of the fundamental intellectual architecture for dealing with these new politics hasn't yet been built. And what's required is a broader discussion with the Chinese, with India, with all of the peoples of Asia, including the United States, about how China's own traditions of governance and religion can enlighten a much more humane and just way forward. But again, I think the center of gravity of this discussion does begin with the kind of governing arrangement which we have in Beijing and the fact that there are many voices for reform within Beijing and within China itself, which we should take an active interest in supporting. Thank you.
I'm going to try and keep my comments even shorter than Eric's. Eric's 5 minutes were Indian 5 minutes, which, as everyone knows, run longer. I'm going to try and come back to American time if I can. China and India are the two giants that straddle the Himalayas. One to the north of the Himalayas, one to the south of the Himalayas. Both have comparable resources, comparable size of population. Right now, of course, China's economy is much larger and is growing at a reasonable rate. India has a lot of catching up to do. But the rivalry that may actually have a more negative impact on that region is not the rivalry between China and India. The reason why I say that is because both countries, being large, being cognizant of their size, and being historic entities going back several centuries, have an understanding of what they can and cannot do with one another. The rivalry that is likely to be unpredictable is the rivalry between the new kid on the block, Pakistan, and the historic entity, India, out of which Pakistan was carved out. If you look at the map of the Himalayas, all the countries straddling it have been there for a long time. So the Nepalese know that they are bound together by a common language, by the fact that they have had a monarchy going back a long time. The Bhutanese have been an entity for a long time in history. Sikkim, which even though it's now part of the modern Union of India, but it has an entity and an identity that goes back a long time. And of course, India has been an entity for thousands of years, as has China, irrespective of where the boundaries of that China ought to be. Pakistan, on the other hand, is an idea that appeared only 74 years ago, and a country that appeared only 67 years ago. And that has made Pakistan quite unwilling to accept history as the determinant of the future. So what we see is Pakistan willing to use subconventional warfare, and B, exercising asymmetric power. India and Pakistan are not comparable in size, but Pakistan obsesses over its competition with India. It wants to be India's equal without being India's equal. It's as I have often said, it is like Belgium spending all its time and energy trying to compete with either Germany or France. Of course, the Belgians understood that a long time ago and realized that they would have to make a whole lot more chocolate than they do to be able to compete with France and Germany. Unfortunately, my countrymen are unwilling to recognize that, which is why I'm sitting here and not in Islamabad running the place. What is the Chinese connection with Pakistan? Well, China, of course, looked upon Pakistan, especially after the 1962 Sino-Indian War, as a potential ally in the containment of India. Before that, Pakistan was the first Muslim country to recognize the People's Republic of China and establish diplomatic relations. That enabled Pakistan to be a kind of window on the Muslim world for China. After 62, it became more of a proactive combination, we need to contain India. But things have changed, except that people in Pakistan are not yet aware of that huge change. China has recognized that it does not want to have a conflict with India, and it has disagreements with India, but as the Chinese president told the Pakistani parliament when he came to Pakistan in 1998, it is best to set aside disputes that you cannot resolve to be able to move forward for things that you can share. And so India and China have something like $70 billion trade every year on average. Pakistan and China, on the other hand, again, size matters. Pakistan and China only have about $10 billion in trade. And while there's a lot of noise about this $46 billion to $54 billion investment plans, any investment that involves building roads and rails through high mountains, the Karakoram mountain ranges, all the way down to the south of Pakistan, to the Gwadar and Karachi coast, is not something that's going to happen day after tomorrow. It'll take a long time. In fact, the Gwadar port, which was first spoken of by Pakistan in 1972, And the then Pakistani leader, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, offered the Gwadar port to the Americans that, we want you to develop a port on our coast, and then you can use that as a naval base. The Americans said, we are not interested. By then, they had opened up access to the various Persian Gulf countries, and of course, they were very close to Iran. The Chinese were the second ones to be offered, but between 1974 and 2007, they did not invest while talking about it. So you find a lot of mention of Gwadar as a potential new port that will be open to the Chinese in Pakistani literature going back to the 70s. But really, the port started getting built only in 2007. And even after its completion, it's not an active port for the simple reason that Pakistan is not a country where the economy is growing fast enough to have a lot of traffic on the port. And so, will China really go through with all these massive projects? I'm not too certain. I think China's real purpose is to reassure Pakistan, because they see Pakistan as a country that manages to come to the brink every few years. So they want to reassure Pakistan. They want to ensure that Pakistan does not economically collapse, but they also want to encourage Pakistan to be a more, shall we say, normal state. A country that understands the fundamental principles of global economics and global international relations, that does not allow jihadis from all over the world to congregate, including from China. Because China is concerned that much of the violence that is taking place in Xinjiang among Uyghur Muslims emanates from camps run by various jihadi groups on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, partly in Pakistan, partly in Afghanistan. So it was interesting. It is interesting that Pakistan and China have a lot of poetical references to their relationship. And it is often said that the Pakistani-Chinese relationship is higher than the Karakoram Mountains and deeper than the Indian Ocean and sweeter than the sweetest honey. But it's very interesting that the Chinese president, when he went to Pakistan recently, he described this not like previous leaders who used to say it as a statement, which kind of made Pakistanis feel it's a statement of policy. He actually said, this is poetry. And in his substantial remarks, he made two important deviations from from Chinese leaders visiting Pakistan in the past. First, he did not mention Kashmir at all. He did not mention the Pakistan-India dispute over Kashmir. Pakistan has always expected China to help Pakistan in the Kashmir dispute. In this, by not mentioning Kashmir, the Chinese very subtly signaled to the Pakistanis, calm down on this one. And the second subtle thing was a single line in the joint statement where it said, quote, the Chinese side encouraged the Pakistani side to resolve their differences with their neighbors, meaning stop fighting with Afghanistan and India, which is what makes Pakistan such a precarious place. It's a small country. It's 200 million people, but compared to India, for example, it is only 1/6 the population, 1/10 the size of the economy, and 1/20 the size of foreign exchange reserves. The number of PhDs that have been produced in Pakistan since its inception in 1947 equals the number of PhDs that are produced each year in India. I know that there are Indians in the audience who would say, yeah, we know how good those PhDs are, but the fact still remains that in by most elements of national power, Pakistan is way behind India, and yet Pakistan is India's equal in nuclear weapons. Pakistan is a nuclear weapons power, and Pakistan wants to play catch-up in conventional military capability and has an advantage in sub-conventional military capability, which is also known internationally now in the post-9/11 world as the T word, terrorism. That is not a good recipe for Pakistan. So China, I think, actually in relation to Pakistan, may be a moderating influence on Pakistan. It may be the country that may actually be trying to persuade the Pakistanis in its own way that while we are with you in making sure that India doesn't overrun you, not that India wants to, but that you have to get your act together. And this assurance of investment, etc., is, if you can do the investment, play the investment game, get into it. They didn't promise aid, unlike the Americans, who are always willing to write a check sort of to calm Pakistani nerves down. They are not writing a check. They are not giving aid. They are willing to do solid investment projects based on a return on equity, and if Pakistan can ensure that. Now, where does that leave us in relation to the Himalayas and Pakistan's role in the Himalayas? The fact remains that Pakistan, unless as a nation and a state it can be stabilized and some level of comfort can be found in Pakistan about being a new country, but a country that looks, instead of inventing a history, starts building a future. Instead of pretending that it can relocate itself spiritually in the Middle East because it's Muslim, recognize that it's an integral part of South Asia. And that's where its future lies. If that can happen, then Pakistan can join the other little states of the Himalayas in being a positive contributor to the Himalayas. If not, the other states will have to interact with Pakistan in a manner in which Pakistan does not play the role of spoiler, especially by igniting radical Islamism. There are Muslim pockets, for example, among the Buddhists in Ladakh and everywhere. And if radical Islam keeps spilling over, it will be a destroyer of traditional culture and the tradition of religious harmony. And of course, if these massive infrastructure projects also are initiated without regard for environmental and ecological factors, then they could themselves be unfortunate in terms of providing for a more stable Himalayan region. Thank you all very much.
Doctor, I'm not sure the 5-minute challenge has been convincingly won yet, so the field is open to you.
Okay. Thanks. Let me see if I can do in the 5 to 7 minutes, I thought was the barrier. So I'll try and make 3 essential points. One is how does India respond to the new challenges of connectivity, which is now the central theme that arises out of the Silk Road initiative from China, as well as its own internal logic of economic development. The second, I think, aspect is the tension between the notions of sovereignty. I mean, how India, China, and the region sees sovereignty, but at the same time has to deal with cultural borders that do not match the political borders. And how do you deal with that? A challenge in terms of managing this complexity. And finally, how does India respond to dealing with the prospects for dangerous regional rivalry, and can it do something to mitigate it and to produce an outcome where there's more cooperation within the region than rivalry? But before I make these 3 points, I think I just wanted to make a point about when we talk about the Himalayas. I think it's really a shorthand for a much bigger space. There was references made to Tibet and Xinjiang, but I think it's a much larger space. I think the mountains themselves, Himalayas is normally used as a shorthand for a full range of different mountains. I think the Kunlun, the Pamir, the Hindu Kush, the Great Himalayas, which is what most of us were referring to, and then the Eastern Himalayas, which stretch into Burma, the border between Burma and China. So this is a vast mountain range. And who was it who was referring to the Indian plate knocking up against the Eurasian plate? That it is that great collision that produced these expansive mountains. And the regions that we talk about around this spine of the Great Himalayas include some of the most exotic, most romantic, most complex regions. I think from Central Asia to Burma, to northern Burma, to India's northeast, to India's Kashmir, to the northern areas that in Pakistan today, Tibet, Xinjiang, Yunnan. So you have actually a fairly expansive set of regions that each one brings its own specific complexity and have become, I think, for the first time, a part of a geopolitical play that they were not. At least for the last at least 2 centuries, that the rise of China has opened up these spaces in ways in which they were not before. In fact, these regions were not as remote as we often think of them, because there were periods when these regions were quite integrally connected to others. For example, when we talk about the Silk Road, that's really about a subcontinent that China linked to through a set of roads to the great the Mediterranean civilizations and to Iran. That the emergence of the maritime age made these remote. The decline of overland trade made them remote. It is not that remoteness was a natural condition, but it's the change of the economic geography and economic conditions which produce that thing. And today what we're seeing is breaking of that barrier by the rise of the Chinese economic power and its determination to, connect its own markets internally, the whole idea of marching west, and then connecting them to the neighboring regions in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, and all the way up to Europe, where the trains are now running from Chongqing all the way to, they want to extend it to Baltics as well. So you're talking about the second largest economy for the first time cracking open the inner spaces of Eurasia and connecting them. So I think this is a gigantic churn that is taking place, and dealing with it, I think, is going to be a real major challenge. And I think three issues then it arise. I think one is India's connectivity. And I think in the morning we talked about, in the earlier session we talked about that how do you do modernization, development, connectivity without wrecking the environment? That I think the question of sustainable development, I think if you merely bring in railroads, I mean, what does the Tibet Railway done? What do the people feel about the consequences of building a railway line to Tibet? That you have to find it, you can't say there can't be any development in Tibet, Xinjiang, or the inner regions of Asia. But the question is, have we learned something over the last 200 years of developmental experience that we can do this with greater sensitivity to ecology, and to cultures? I mean, I think that is the big question, which I think both China and India, I think all the major countries will have to address in a fundamental manner. I think the interesting thing, of course, connectivity is that there's no road that is only used for one purpose. The moment the Chinese have put roads and railways into Tibet and the Himalayan regions, of course, you can move your military as well. That, of course, we know that the great railways of America were a consequence of the Civil War, that railways and connectivity are linked to the larger geopolitical trends. And I think once China is doing that, I think India too is responding now to reconnect its own regions, of its frontier regions. And then the danger is that the militaries are beginning to operate much closer to the border, and this generates its own tensions. So therefore, connectivity with it brings the dynamic of military engagement between the two sides that has to be addressed. And I think here, both China and India will be tested quite severely in terms of how do you manage this new capacity to deploy close to the borders, and how do we deal with them? I think that's one challenge. The second is the tension between sovereignty as understood by the post-colonial states and the cultural borders that are separate. There, after all, as we said, Tibet and Ladakh are connected, Nepal and Tibet are connected, Yunnan is connected to northern Burma and to northeast India. You have Xinjiang is connected to Kashmir and other parts of Pakistan. So what you have is that how do we think about sovereignty within this context? And I think that is the big challenge. There, I think, there was a time when, at least Deng Xiaoping said that, look, one country, two systems. I mean, it's a quite an imaginative way of posing. Look, it's again, I think, ancient Chinese wisdom that, look, big countries and small fish cannot be fried too hard. You try to handle them too much, they tend to fall apart. So therefore, this idea that, look, you got to be sophisticated, because India and China are the oldest continuing civilizations, that the territoriality was never absolutely defined. So you had a slightly vague relationship with your peripheral regions, but today you impose the Westphalian notion. And I think the challenge for us is China is now moving towards a more definitive, more harder interpretation of its sovereignty. And if it stays with Deng Xiaoping's ideas of a softer way of dealing with the parts that you are. I mean, I think Dalai Lama is merely seeking autonomy, is not seeking independence. So therefore, how do you deal with your frontier regions? Can you deal with them with greater sensitivity? One country, two systems. India too has this Article 370, which kind of created that space. How do we deal with Kashmir? How do we deal with northeastern states, which are not always central to the mainland? So therefore, you need political administrative arrangements that are sensitive to the peripheral regions and connect with them. One is the nature of that political relationship within the sovereign space. The other, of course, is the whole question of how do you deal with ethnic rights, cultural rights. And then on top of it, these cultural ethnic links exist across borders. So the question of creating soft borders while promoting connectivity, accepting some broad agreements on borders, but then creating mutually beneficial connectivities across the border. Those, I think, are really the test, and I think going there is going to be the problem. And lastly, let me just conclude by saying that there is room for, I think, the temptation for rivalry between India, China, India, Pakistan, and then the US is going to be a big player in all this. For example, US talks about pivoting to the east, the Chinese talk about marching west. So what the US does in one region has a big effect. The US is seen as competing with China in northern Burma, but today it welcomes larger Chinese role in Pakistan, Afghanistan. So I think it's not a neat paradigm that I think this is where I think what we need is that India, China, and the US begin to think more creatively, more purposefully in terms of can we produce outcomes that can moderate the negative forces like the Taliban in Pakistan? Can we work together to create concepts for ecologically sustainable development? Can we limit the competition between ourselves to preserve one of the world's most important, culturally most extraordinary regions that have created their own cultures over such a long period? Can we do this within a cooperative framework? And I think India will have to play its role, and we still need strong support from the US, as well as an engagement with China on a substantive, sustainable basis. I think I'll stop. Didn't meet the challenge, really.
So we have run a little bit over, but perhaps we could take 1 or 2 moments just before lunch, which we're waiting for questions from the audience. Are there any questions, or are people too hungry?
Oh, there's one.
Thank you. This is Husain Haqqani from Nepal. I'm a graduate student in Keynote. To the panelists, I would like to draw their attention, since we're talking about the future of the Himalayas, I would like to update the information that Nepal, after the 10 years of Mao's insurgency has been successfully mainstreamed recently. And the next thing is that 250 years of monarchy has been abolished completely in this modern era in the country. That was for 250 years. And despite the size of the country, the process of making federal constitution is under process, despite the failure of promulgations of the constitutions from the first assembly. And recently, a devastating earthquake of 8.9 magnitude has damaged the nation and diverted the political issues. So my question is, despite these facts, the issues of Nepal has been excluded in this discussion, in this forum, which I feel that the economic development, political stability in the Himalaya region cannot be completely anticipated by excluding one of the sovereign entity in the Himalaya region. So that's my essential questions to the whole panelists. Thank you.
Could I respond to that?
I think, but I think we did discuss Nepal in the morning.
Frankly, sir, I think you prepared your intervention before this session began, because I started by talking extensively about Nepal, and so did the others.
And the morning session, I had a lot of discussion of Nepal. You probably missed that. I mean, obviously it wasn't enough. Everybody wants in half a day. You can, when you're discussing so many places, we can't have enough discussion of Nepal to satisfy you or others who may be focused on Nepal. But the fact remains that we did discuss Nepal, and we all consider Nepal an important country in that region.